Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jane Hewitt and I'm the Capability Building Coordinator at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand are part of the Info Exchange Group, a not-for-profit social enterprise that tackles the biggest social challenges through the smart and creative use of technology. And for those of you who haven't attended a webinar session with us before, Connecting Up and TechSoup facilitate an annual training calendar of online webinars, workshops, boot camps and webcons to help the social sector upskill in all things digital. And you can check out our training and education menu on the websites for more events coming up for the rest of the year. So welcome today to the webinar, Finding the Perfect CRM for Your Nonprofit with Stephen Mallow from Fundraising Force. Before we begin, we'll start with a bit of housekeeping today. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please just type them into the questions box on your GoToWebinar panel and I should be able to assist. If you have any questions during the session, please also type these into the questions box and we will answer them in the Q&A session that will be coming up at the end of today's webinar. And please note that your comments and questions won't appear to the rest of the group. And if you're on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the video and the audio, so please just close any programs that you're not using. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and you'll get a link to the recording and a copy of these slides later on today. And just before we start, I'd like to remind everybody that we do send out a quick survey when this webinar is closing, so we'd really appreciate everybody taking a couple of minutes to fill that in. So that's all from me. I'll pass over to Stephen to get things started.
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me today. And I've always found Connecting Up to be a really fantastic organization, so I'm happy to be part of it and appreciate everybody registering and attending today. I am a fundraising professional by training. I've been fundraising for 35 years, and so I've been at it for quite a while. 7 years ago, I started this company called Fundraising Force, and we are an Australian company, Sydney-based. We provide fundraising strategy as well as technology consulting. So we're not just focused on the CRM platform, we're focused on any technology platform for the NFP space. We do conduct CRM searches, which is what I'm going to cover today. And we also provide assistance for CRM implementations, mostly on the project management side. So that's what we do in the technology space, and we've been at it for quite a while. We probably do about 36 CRM searches in a given year, so it's a lot. I've got, I think, 4 or 5 going right now at this point in time. So we're out in the market constantly searching for that perfect CRM for the best match for the organization in which we're working. So in terms of what I'm going to cover today, I'm going to give you an overview of what products are available in the market. And most of those brands you will have heard of, but I want to talk about the pros and cons of each of them and the different types of platforms available. I am going to give 6 common misconceptions because I think that there are some false thoughts out there in the market, and I'd like to address every one of them. I'm going to talk about who in your organization that you should involve if you're doing a technology search. I'll cover a 10-point CRM search process, and I'm actually going to cover each and every one of them in depth today on this webinar. I'll also talk about the implementation of a CRM. So first the search and then the implementation, the fun part. And I'll talk about some of the things that you need to do as part of that implementation. And finally, I'm going to wrap up with some key takeaways. As was said, we are going to take questions at the end. So please, by all means, put them in the chat window and we'll address them at the end. I've got my timer going, so I'll allow plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So I'd like to start out with 2 polls. The first one that I'd like to just get a bit of an assessment on is how many organizations represented here today currently use a CRM. So if you don't have a CRM and use Excel, you should answer no, but any type of CRM is fine and you would answer yes. So I'll pause and let you vote. So interesting, over half of the attendees here today don't have a CRM. 3% are unsure, but over half of you don't have a CRM, so that's very interesting. I'm going to go on to the second question, which is how many organizations represented here today are currently searching for a new CRM? So that's just a simple yes or no. %91. Wow, I did predict that it would be a large percentage, so so no surprise there. That's fantastic, and perhaps that's why you're here. So that's great. All right, let me turn to the products. There are two types of products in the market. I typically put them in two buckets, if you will, and those buckets are fundraising platforms. So simple, straight fundraising platforms. They are fit for purpose, fantastic fundraising products, and that's what they're built to do. And then there also are what I call CRM platforms. So those might be platforms that would be used across the organization. So two different buckets that I put the products into. Let's look at the first bucket, which is that bucket of fundraising platforms. So in that space, we find IMIS, a product by ASI. We find a product out of New Zealand called Vega. We find a product called Thank You. And then we have the Blackbaud products, so eTapestry, the Razor's Edge, and Blackbaud CRM. So those are the products that fit in that fundraising platform. They are fantastic products. They're fit for purpose. They're largely designed to accomplish the fundraising requirements of an organization. Now, could they be used for programs, services, and those sort of things? Sure, and some organizations try to do that, but they face a bit of a challenge because they speak a fundraising language in them. So they would find them to be a bit challenging to deliver programs, services, those sorts of things. On the other side, we have CRM platforms. And in that space, we find two products, and those are Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics. Now, are there other products in the market? Sure. There are other platforms that are really trying to get into the not-for-profit space, but overall, those are the two platforms that have nonprofit specific product in this space. So now let me turn your attention to these misconceptions. And I said that there are 6 of them. I'm going to address each and every one of them. The first one is that this feeling that you need to buy quickly. I would suggest that you don't have to. Yes, I know that you want to get something in place tomorrow. It's not going to happen tomorrow. Take your time and do a thorough search. Make sure that you do all of the 10 steps. And make sure that you are guided by facts and not by fiction. Don't buy quickly. Don't have a knee-jerk reaction. The second one is, I need it all and I need it now. The fact of the matter is you're not going to be able to implement it all, and you're not going to be able to implement it all tomorrow anyway. So take your time, buy the technology that you can grow into over time. Don't feel like you've got to buy all the technology today. It'll still be there tomorrow. You don't need to act as quickly as you think that you have to, and you certainly don't have to do it today. You can phase the project in. Product A, whatever it is off of that list that I just showed you, is the only one available. That's not true. In Australia, it used to be that there were 1, maybe 2 products that spoke to the not-for-profit sector, and that's not true anymore. There are lots of products. There's a lot of choice in the market, and if I was giving this webinar a year or 2 from now, there would be even more logos on the slide. So you've got choice in this market. Don't focus just on product A, if you will. Product B is the best available. I want you to challenge that thought and investigate all the products and figure out the best product amongst that lot against your functional requirements, which we'll talk about in a minute. You shouldn't go into this with a closed mind and believe that you have to get one of those products because it's the best. Investigate your functional requirements first and then figure out the best match to your organization. Have an open mind going into the process. It must be good, X organization uses it. Really challenge this thought. At the end of the day, just because XYZ organization, one of the not-for-profits out there that you highly admire, or perhaps a school or university that you admire uses it, doesn't mean it's going to be the best fit for your organization. Find the best match for your organization. If that happens to be a product that those organizations that you admire uses, fantastic. But at the end of the day, you've got to find the best fit for your organization. Product C will work out of the box. Gone are the days that you plug in a CD-ROM and you start to use it. These products all have to be configured at some level. Some of them less than others in certain areas. But at the end of the day, every single one of those products that I showed you on an earlier slide are going to need to be configured. Some of them will have to be configured in a larger fashion, and some of them will have to have applications bolted on to deliver on some of your requirements. But every single one of them will have to be configured. Nothing comes out of the box anymore. I've used product D before. I love it, and we've got to go get that. That kind of relates back to, an earlier thought. I think at the end of the day, you need to go in and have an open mind and make sure that just because you used it at another organization, it doesn't mean that it's the best fit for your current organization. Let's now turn to who to involve in your organization. As I address these different audiences, I want you to think about who in your organization you need to get buy-in from. And sometimes that's not just senior leadership. Sometimes that is the frontline staff. And so what I want to suggest to you is that in this search process, you create a selection committee, a selection panel, if you will, that is made up of a cross-section of your staff. And that might not only be a variety of people across the organization, from the program side, the fundraising side, operations, executive, etc., but it also might be varying levels of staff in an organization. Sometimes the people who are in entry-level positions, if you will, have the best ideas. Involve them. This is a way to get people from a variety of levels on the org chart involved in a decision. You certainly want to involve leadership. At the end of the day, your selection committee is going to be making a recommendation to leadership. And so you might want to involve leadership at a variety of levels or stages throughout the process. You certainly want to involve the finance team or a member from the finance team. They're the ones that are going to end up actually committing the budget dollars. Board, you probably don't want a board member on your selection panel, but you certainly are going to report up to the board. Your leadership are going to have to ultimately deliver a business case to the board. So figure out ways to keep the board informed throughout the process. You don't want to surprise them at the end with a business case. Instead, you want to keep them fully informed, throughout the process. Now I'm going to get into the 10-point process. What I'll do first is I'll review the 10 points up front, and then I'm going to dissect each and every one. So just be patient here. The first one is requirements gathering. The second step is market research. The third is sending out invitations to the market. The fourth is developing a request for proposals or a whole packet. The fifth is conducting response meetings. The sixth step is accepting proposals from those suppliers. The seventh is entertaining demonstrations from the suppliers. The eighth is reaching negotiations. The ninth is ultimately creating a selection. And the 10th is writing a business plan. So those are the 10 steps that I recommend you follow in a CRM search. Now let me go into each and every one of them. The first step, as I said, is requirements gathering. I think this is probably the most important step. And it's important because we need to fully understand our organization. You have to understand your organization. You think you might know your organization, but ask yourself if you can fully articulate your requirements and articulate them in such a way that an outsider will understand what functional requirements you must have in your CRM. Now, the fact of the matter is, most organizations represented here today will have functional requirements for their CRM in common. It's as though we all work for one organization. I get that. But there are things that are going to be unique to your organization or processes that are going to be unique to your organization that you're going to have to articulate in a very short, clear, concise fashion so that a variety of suppliers can pick that up, understand it, and identify whether or not their CRM will be able to meet that functional requirement. The next step is you're going to have to document those requirements, and I'll show you that document in a minute. You're going to also have to identify what data do you want to migrate into the new CRM. That might be a migration from your existing CRM. It also might be a migration from a host of Excel spreadsheets. There's not a day that goes by that I don't talk to organizations that would have 20, 30, sometimes hundreds of spreadsheets across their organization. And they might say, not only are we migrating from X CRM to Y CRM, but we also have to get all this data into the CRM. Not a problem. That is something that's a challenge that we deal with each and every day. And it can be done, but you first have to inventory that data. You need to document where all that data is going to come from. If it's just coming from your existing CRM, you need to give an inventory of that data. If it's coming from a variety of spreadsheets, you need to give an inventory of that data as well. And sometimes it's both. This is an example of a snapshot of a functional requirements document. What I'd like to do is just walk you through the anatomy of it, if you will, so that you fully understand. You'll notice on the far left side here, I've got a requirement number. So imagine this is a big Excel spreadsheet and that there's a tab for each functional area. So you might have one for operations, volunteer services, major gifts, trusts and foundations, whatever it is. Each individual business unit, if you will, in your organization will have a dedicated tab. You'll identify the requirement number for each and every row. And so I've got a bit of a naming convention to mine, and you can see that here for high value fundraising and the major gift section with that HVM, etc. The next section is the actual requirement area. You want to start it out with ability to or CRM must. And notice how they're very short sentences, clear, concise, straight to the point. Remember, you're not designing the CRM here. All you're doing is articulating what the CRM must deliver at go live. The next column is essential or desired. Must that CRM have that, or would you like it to? So essential or desired. The next column on my spreadsheet is a phase number. Is this phase 1, phase 2, or beyond? And then you'll notice 4 distinct columns without anything in it. That's what the supplier is actually going to mark. They're going to put a tick in one of those boxes, the first choice, you'll see the key there at the top, configuration. Our CRM, speaking like a supplier, can be configured to deliver on that requirement. That's the least expensive of the choices. Second column, our second choice there, customization. We can customize our CRM to meet that requirement. That's likely the most expensive option. The third choice there, this requirement can be met through a third-party application. The last column there, we cannot meet this requirement. You want to have very few ticks in that column. So this is just a sample. You'll make up your own, but it just gives you a flavoring for what that functional requirements document ultimately will look like. The next step, market research. So I've already done a bit of it for you, but keep in mind that the fundraising platforms are typically implemented only by those manufacturers. So Blackbaud implement Blackbaud product, IMIS, Thank You, Vega, they all implement their own products. So you don't have a lot of choice in the market in terms of the partner you work with. On the platform side, Salesforce and Microsoft, you've got a lot of choice. There's a big variety there. That's not an endorsement for a platform. A platform might be right for your organization. I'm just pointing out that when you do your market research, you'll not only be researching, do you want a platform or a fundraising product, but within the platforms, which of those suppliers that are partners of those platforms are you going to go out to? So understand the available product in the market, decide whether you want that fundraising or CRM platform, and I say that's an and or, perhaps you want to go out to both. Conduct some initial research on those products. So what I mean by that is I'd like you to challenge your thoughts and perhaps not only visit their websites, but also talk with others that work with these suppliers and these platforms and do some initial research. That may cut some out right away, but it also might include some that you wouldn't have otherwise thought to include. My third step, the request for proposals. So the RFP, you actually need to write up a document. They sometimes are 20, 30 pages in length because you need to tell a story about your organization, walk them through the process that you're following to ultimately select a CRM, and then you want to identify some questions that you need them to write narrative answers back on. So what are those things that you must know? I'll walk through the anatomy of an RFP in a minute, but you also want to match your RFP to that functional requirements document that I showed you earlier. You want to ask them to elaborate on some of those points and then also on some that are not included in the functional requirements. This is the makeup of the table of contents for an RFP that we released last year. I would point out a few things to this. So up front, you're going to write an executive summary, and that will just be about your process and some notations that you want to reinforce with them. There's a section that is about your organization. You can see that I've masked this organization, but you want to talk about your mission, your values, things like that, just to make sure there's an alignment with the particular suppliers that you're going out to. You want to walk them through the full CRM search process, giving all of the target dates and deadlines so that everybody has those up front. You want to have a confidentiality statement. They will have already signed your NDA in order to receive this packet, but imagine you want to reinforce the importance of confidentiality. You don't want this broadcast to the world. You want to draw their attention to those functional requirements and have a hyperlink back to that document in section 5. And then section 6 contains some things that might be important to your organization, and you need a narrative response back on those things. Data security is one of those. We've had a lot of data breaches in our sector and certainly in the for-profit side. There's probably not a week that goes by that I don't get a notice that says that my data was part of a breach. And so you want to know what measures they're putting in place, whether or not they've ever had a data breach, and what mitigation strategies they have to prevent a data breach. There's other suggested sections there on your screen, but you get the flavor for the types of things that you might ask them to elaborate on. There'll be appendix items, and you'll certainly have your data inventory that I mentioned earlier. So that's the makeup of the actual RFP document. Let's go on to number 4, and this is the invitations. So this is where you're going to invite suppliers based on your market research. I have a running Excel sheet that lists the suppliers, the contact name, and their basic contact details. And it's by platform. So remember, the fundraising side, there'll be one supplier for each of those platforms. And remember, on the platform side, there'll be many suppliers for those platforms. But on this Excel spreadsheet, I start to track certain details so that I can remember when I did what with the suppliers. You're going to want to, in that invite, describe the process and the timeline. And you're also going to want to set some boundaries. And it might be that, they're not allowed to contact anybody on your team once they opt into the process, and just sort of set some guidelines for them, because you will be surprised the suppliers that will try to reach out to staff members, and you don't want to create an unlevel playing field. So you want to set some boundaries. You'll also include your non-disclosure agreement, your confidentiality agreement. And when they sign that agreement, they're opting into your process. If they don't return that NDA or that confidentiality agreement, they shouldn't get your RFP packet. So only those that sign that agreement should receive your packet. Let's go on to number 5. We're almost halfway through the 10-point process. And these are the response meetings. So this can be conducted either one-on-one or in a group. And let me describe the pros and cons of each. If you conduct them one-on-one, that's where you're going to carve out an hour or so to answer each and every supplier's questions and provide any additional details. So those are one-on-one. They're usually done by a Zoom or GoToMeeting or some sort of a web platform. And you make yourself available, and they're scheduled in based on the supplier's desire, not required. The second option is to do that by group. And that's where you designate a date and a time, and they come to you, or they dial into a web platform, and you conduct a group release, discussion, and you answer everybody's questions in front of everyone. Let me tell you about the pros and cons of each. The one-on-one keeps your group masked. So no supplier knows which platforms and which partners you've gone out to. It's a blind process. Some would consider that to be advantageous because the masking creates a competitive atmosphere. It's a bit of a mystery to the suppliers who you've gone out to. The con of that process is you must schedule one-on-one meetings and take a different hour for each and every supplier. So let's imagine you invite 6, 7, 8 suppliers. That's a chunk of your time that would be required. So there's a pro and a con for everything, and there's the pro and con for that. The group setting, you get all the meetings done at once. It's 1 hour, 2 hours, and it's done, but it unmasks your process. It takes away the blindness of your process. So everybody sits in a room and they see who their competitors are. That may be may present a disadvantage down the road when you're trying to negotiate, because they know their competition and they know their position in the marketplace. So neither one is good or bad. I don't recommend either over the other. Fundraising Force mostly does the one-on-one option because we like to keep the blindness and the mystique about the process throughout the process. But we have also done the group setting. All right. The last point on here, respect the supplier's time. Remember, they're going to invest a lot of time into your process, so you want to be respectful of their time. Make yourself available when they need questions answered. All right, point number 6, the proposals. So you're going to create a selection committee, which I've talked about a little bit earlier, the makeup of it. And that selection committee is going to accept proposals on the deadline, and they're actually going to review the proposals that have come in based on the proposals that arrived on time. And they're going to do that according to an evaluation form. So you want to have your selection committee actually score these proposals. They do it one-on-one, so they are not doing this in a group setting. You will decide who to invite in for demonstrations after you receive everybody's scores. So there is individual think and ultimately there's group think. But you want individual think at this stage. So create an evaluation form and have them score those proposals. Next, you're going to actually entertain demonstrations. Demonstrations are normally about 3 hours, which might seem like a long time frame, but imagine this is their real chance to pitch their product and pitch their team to your team. You're going to want to figure out, is there synergy? Is this not only the right product? Will it meet our functional requirements? But can we work with these people? And so you want to spend a good chunk of time with them. After these demonstrations, you're going to eliminate some suppliers. So it's important to give them the time that they need and that they deserve to present to your team. You want to create a bit of a structured agenda, and you also want to avoid a circus atmosphere. So try to create some structure to the atmosphere that you're going to invite them into. And remember, again, value the investment the supplier is making in your process. Once you get through all of this, ultimately you're going to end up negotiating with the suppliers. And something for you to remember is that the list price is not their best price. Play them off of each other. At the end of the day, you're a nonprofit organization, school or university. You want to make sure that you get the best possible price for the most value, right? And so remember that you are driving the bus. Go ahead and create that competitive environment. If you don't, somebody else is, and they're getting the best price. Ultimately, this is going to lead you to a contract. Make sure that that contract is fully reviewed by your pro bono lawyer, or if you're lucky enough to have a lawyer in-house, by that lawyer. The 9th step is ultimately the selection. So you want to check references that they provide, but you also want to check non-referees. So I recommend that you go out and find organizations that are using their product that they don't put forward. You and I would do that if we were hiring a staff person, and I recommend that you certainly do that with these types of references. Speak to former customers. It's not a bad thing. Just because a customer used to use their platform and doesn't any longer doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to them. And you probably do want to talk to them. Why did they leave the product? Why did they leave this particular supplier? Remember, you're selecting the best platform for your organization. So just because an organization chose to move on doesn't mean that it's a bad product. It just means that it no longer was fit for purpose for that organization. Ultimately, remember that you're buying a relationship here. This is not a transaction. This is going to be a relationship that you will have with this supplier for 5 to 7 years. So you're acquiring that relationship. This is not a one-time transaction. The last point on this is a business case. You want to write a solid business case. That business case target audience is your board and your leadership. You want to discuss in it not only the due diligence that you did that led up to the selection, but you also want to talk about the return on investment that will be had for your organization. You want to talk about how this is going to help you perhaps increase revenue, perhaps save costs, perhaps streamline some processes that are very clunky today. So this business case is really, really important to, again, review the process and show that you've done your due diligence. You want to include the true cost of ownership of the product, perhaps across the next 5 years. Remember that a CRM is not just going to cost annually for licenses, but ultimately there's going to be an investment up front for that first year to actually implement the CRM. So this slide here just really sums up those 10-point steps in a nice visual. And remember, the beginning point is that requirements and getting your arms around your data, ultimately creating that RFP, that requirements document, and some other documents, which will then lead to the supplier meetings, the demonstrations, negotiations, contract, and that sort of stuff that will involve the suppliers. And then ultimately we end up with the implementation, which is really the fun part. So in terms of the implementation, I would suggest to you that if you're conducting a CRM search, get started on the data. It's never too early. Get rid of your duplicate constituents. Clean up your data. Streamline the data so that it can be absorbed by the CRM. So start early and make sure that you get your arms around all the issues that you have with the data. Remember, you need a really precise scope of work, statement of work, scope of work with the supplier. So that's a really important document that you'll formulate with the supplier very early on. Make sure that you've got proper participation on your implementation team, just like you had with the selection committee. Engage a project manager. Find somebody on your team that is really good with attention to detail, really good with deadlines, not only holding themselves to deadlines, but others. Make sure that they're a great communicator. If you can't find somebody internally to do that, find an external resource. There are lots of us out in the market that do project management. They don't have to be a full-time resource. I'm right now working on 5 or 6 projects. And so they're dedicated for a certain number of hours each and every month to your project. Remember, most of you aren't going to be full-time on this project either. I'm now going to review and sort of sum up the key takeaways from the webinar, and then I'll open it up to your questions and hopefully have answers to those. First, don't overbuy technology. I'm today sitting in front of a MacBook Air. I probably use 40, maybe if I'm lucky, 50% of the technology in front of me. That's true of other aspects like our iPhone. It's true of other tools that we have. Don't overbuy a CRM. Only buy the functionality that you're going to use. You can always acquire more and grow into it as your organization grows and as your requirements change. Secondly, acquire something that you can really grow into. Don't underbuy technology as well. So don't buy a platform that it doesn't have a solid roadmap, that isn't going to grow and change with the times. It would be horrific if you had a CRM today that wasn't able to fully deliver on digital requirements, given where we are with technology today and the digital needs that we have as organizations. So make sure that whatever CRM you purchase, you're going to be able to grow into, and that's also going to come along with the times and grow with you. Ensure that your organization is ready for a CRM. So it might have been that over 90% of you stated that you're in the market for a CRM, but at the end of the day, Are you ready for a CRM? Make sure that you, by the time that you sign on the dotted line, you're really ready to implement and you're ready to absorb a full-fledged CRM. Know what you're looking for, gather your requirements, and then go out and find something that matches those requirements. Understand your requirements. I said earlier that many of us think that we know our organization inside and out, but make sure that you do, and make sure that you're able to fully articulate those requirements. Make sure that suppliers ultimately understand what you've tried to articulate. And that's those one-on-one or that group meeting, and make yourself available throughout the process to continue to answer questions. Separate yourself from any supplier influence. So make sure that you have no conflict of interest on your selection committee. Nobody is a partner of anybody who might be pitching you business. Make sure that you separate yourself from any gift giving, dinners, cocktails, those sort of things. You don't want to be influenced by those sorts of things. Remember that you're not buying buttonology. You're acquiring a relationship. So many of these CRMs do things in common. They all track constituents, they all track donations, those sorts of things. So the buttonology will be there, but is the synergy there? Is the relationship there? Are the dynamics there for you to work well with this organization into the future? If you don't feel like you've got the talent or the time to dedicate to a process like this, hire a consultant. There are many of us out in the market that do this kind of thing to actually run the CRM search process for you. That presents some objectivity as well if you need that on your team. I'm now going to open up to any questions that might have come in. I'm happy to take any questions.
Hi, Stephen. Hold on a second.
Okay.
Oh no, somebody's just asking if they will get a copy of the slides, and yes, everybody will receive a copy of the slides and the recording towards the end of today. Yep, there's somebody else asking that. Okay, so Donna is asking, why write the business case last rather than first? Surely you want to develop the business case for implementing a CRM solution before you invest all the time in all of the rest.
Well, the business case is actually, ultimately the funding request. You're not going to know what your platform is going to cost until you've selected the platform. So that's the reason it's at the end. However, I think some organizations, and I've certainly followed this model, get an endorsement from the board to undertake this search with some guidance about what it might cost. The detail is not there about the process. It's not there about the suppliers that you went out to, all of that stuff, because you're doing those things early on. Ultimately, you can build the business case throughout the process, but the actual document can't really be delivered because all the detail's not there until the tail end. But you can certainly go to your board and seek permission to do a search under the understanding that it might cost X dollars for a new platform. Ultimately, again, all those details won't be there to fill in the gaps until the tail end.
Okay, brilliant. Steve is asking, can you use CRM for membership databases, or is there a more specific type of software that can track membership of an NFP organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that some of the fundraising solutions could be used to track membership. And certainly the platform solutions that I highlighted on that second slide are suitable for tracking membership. It's just a different type of constituency. And so absolutely, and membership programs and upgrades and downgrades and all those great things can be tracked in most of these solutions. The thing that I would point out is one of the fundraising platforms started in the membership space, and that's IMIS. So IMIS originally was an association management, a product that grew into the fundraising space over time and adopted more and more not-for-profit functionality. That said, there are some other fundraising solutions that would meet your requirements, and certainly the platforms, Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics would as well.
Excellent. Penelope is saying, thank you, Stephen, for this information. Our organisation just jumped into looking at CRMs, and our experience has been much less structured than you described. For example, when we contacted Salesforce, we were given a trial and directed to Trailhead, where there were a whole lot of modules we had to work through to understand the product, which we just don't have time to do. Is demonstration something we have to reach out to an implementation partner for, and will we only need one demonstration because they're all delivering the same product, i.e. Salesforce?
Yeah, great question, and I'm happy to provide this information. Let me just say to everybody, including Penelope, that my contact details are up on the screen, and feel free to reach out to me if you've got any questions on the content or what have you following this webinar. That said, Salesforce is a large organization. With the two platforms, Salesforce and Microsoft, you're really only buying the technology from them. You're not buying the implementation. So you do need to reach out to Salesforce partners or Microsoft partners in order to receive a demonstration and to engage one of them to actually configure the platform to meet your requirements. It's no longer a blank canvas, if you will, if I can use an art analogy. There are lines drawn in, but you're going to be able to paint different colors within the lines, just to continue that analogy. And what I mean by that is Salesforce and Microsoft both have not-for-profit modules, if you will. Salesforce's is called the Not-for-Profit Success Pack, and Microsoft has a non-profit pack as well. And that is the lines, if you will. It does the basics. It has regular giving functionality, as an example, built within the nonprofit pack. That said, there's lots of configuration that has to happen, and so you will have to engage a Salesforce partner in the mix, and they are out in the market. There are some that are really strong and fantastic, and there are some that are just getting to know our space. So selecting the right partner is important. In terms of the answer to the demonstration question, I oftentimes, for a client, will involve multiple platform partners, and we will receive a demo from multiples of, and I think that that's good, and I'll tell you why. It tells you whether or not the synergy is there for you to work with them. It talks about their talent. It will tell you about their expertise, about our market, the level of that expertise. So I do think it's important to receive the demo and receive proposals, et cetera, from multiples if you're going down that avenue.
Okay. Emma is asking, do you have any examples of what we should be looking for, our requirements? We're looking at a CRM for our mailing list, not fundraising.
Do I have any example? Can you just repeat that part again? Any examples of what?
Do you have examples of what we should be looking for for our requirements? We're looking at a CRM for our mailing list, not for fundraising.
Yeah, let me make a couple of suggestions here. You said her name's Emma, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, have Emma contact me because I'd like to understand more. A CRM for a mailing list, I'm not sure what that's about, but I'd like to understand more. Here's what I would say, examples. So I have examples specific to clients that we've done CRM searches for, and those would be proprietary to them. That said, I would say that there are lots of functional requirements, so those single lines that we have in common, as I said earlier. And so I would have examples of those. I just want to understand Emma's question in greater detail, and if she can reach out to me you know, I'm happy to speak with Emma on the phone or email me, and we can email back and forth as well.
Perfect, thank you. Colleen is asking any ballpark figures you could give around cost.
Oh, I knew somebody was going to ask that question. That's almost like how long is a piece of string? The costs are both for the licenses and also for the implementation. So you're going to have two costs the first year, and then you're going to have annualized license costs thereafter. So let me just give you some ideas. On the fundraising side, you're either, this is true of everything actually, you're either costed, you have to budget for either dedicated licenses per user, that's one licensing model, or the number of records that you have in your CRM. So you can imagine a small organization will have low annualized costs because they won't need a lot of licenses. So if they go with a platform that is licensed, they won't need a lot of licenses. Or they also might not have many records in their CRM, and therefore, if they go with the record model platform, they're not going to have high costs either. So that's the licensing model, and there's both in this market. On the implementation, smaller organizations tend to get by with a less expensive implementation because guess what? Their functional requirements are not as complex, say, as the university where I am today. So smaller organizations on this webinar today can rest assured that there are CRM platforms that are licensed or costed every year that are affordable for them in this market. There also are platforms that are free in this market. So Salesforce offer the first 10 licenses for free for an organization. So if you've got 10 or under users, that's a fantastic model for you. The second one, Microsoft offer the first 5 licenses for free for not-for-profit organizations. So that's a really good model, particularly for smaller organizations. But guess what? It's also a great savings for a middle-sized or large organization to have 10 free licenses or 5 free licenses. Money's money, and that reduces costs. The other platforms that are either licensed start to charge you from the first license onward, or if they're records-based, the number of records, the bands are, you know, something like up to 5,000 records, it costs X, 5,000 to 999 costs Y, that sort of banded model. I would say to you on the implementation side, a small organization can expect to invest probably around 30,000 for an implementation. That's that one-time project cost. And it goes up from there depending upon the complexity of your requirements. So that's a difficult question for me to answer in a straightforward fashion for each and every organization represented here today because it's a bit of a mix. I would say to you that everything is negotiable, and you ought to negotiate. If you're not a great negotiator, find somebody on your team that can help you with that, that has that skill, and don't give up. Keep negotiating and play these platforms off of each other. When you get down to your final 2, make sure that you play them off of each other, because at the end of the day, budget is budget, and especially in this economic climate, we have to watch the donor dollars very carefully.
Lovely. Emma is asking about mailing lists. Do you have any thoughts on HubSpot or Nation Builder?
I don't. We're product agnostic, so we speak favorably about everybody out there because you know, we need to remain neutral in the market. I will tell you, I just did an analysis of HubSpot for a charitable organization, actually for 2 organizations. So I'm familiar with the product. Nation Builder, I just had a conversation with a politician a state member of parliament in New South Wales about the fact that his office uses Nation Builder despite the fact that his partner works for Salesforce. So there you go. I think, you know, both of them are probably pretty darn good marketing platforms. They're fit for purpose for certain aspects and not for others, but that would be true of other products that I've shown you today. I realize that I didn't include those logos on my presentation, and that's because very few organizations would truly use them for CRM purposes because they don't meet a full array of requirements. That's not to suggest that they're weak products or that you should run away from them. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just suggesting it depends upon the other requirements besides that mailing list that you're describing.
Just got time for a couple more. So Louise is saying, we're a small non-profit. If we don't have the budget, capacity, or need to implement a big grunty CRM like Salesforce, can we get by with a provider like Monday.com or MailChimp and set it up ourselves? What are your tips for this approach?
Yeah, well, first of all, MailChimp is not a CRM. It's a, marketing platform to push out largely, emails and those sorts of things. I get why, I get the question. And I also receive that same question all the time. So I fully appreciate it. Here's what I would suggest to you. Don't give up on some of the brands that I showed you logos for on the screen, because some of those brands have implemented very small organizations, and there are partners that will implement for very low price point. The reason I say don't give up on them is twofold. One, I'm aware who out there can do quite an inexpensive implementation. So earlier I gave you a 30,000 price point. That's an average for a very limited implementation. It's not to suggest it's the lowest. So take those words literal, and let me tell you that there are suppliers for certain platforms that will implement at a very, very, very low and reasonable cost. And that's not to suggest that you don't get quality from them. So high quality, low cost for a very small organization is available. The second thing is, you don't want to go through this again in a year or two. You're really implementing something that you want your organization to use for 5 to 7, maybe more years. So don't exclude certain platforms or partners just because you believe that you can't afford it. I can guarantee you that there are platforms and suppliers affiliated with those platforms that will meet your requirements and more, do it high quality, and do it for a low price point.
Okay, we've just got time for one more question. This one's from Paul. Our members provide services for our clients. We need to manage both client and supplier member information, as well as the pro bono work we do to assist supplier members. Are the platforms, particularly Dynamics, capable of managing these different relationships?
Absolutely. So I would say to you that there would be some fundraising platforms that could do that. The CRM platforms, Salesforce and Dynamics, can definitely do that. And if that person who asked that question wants to reach out to me, I'm happy to discuss that in further detail, as well as anybody about any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask today. I think that I can guide you in the right direction.
Lovely, thank you very much. I think that you will be getting a bit of contact from people. Sorry to everybody who we weren't able to answer everybody's questions today, but as Stephen says, please do get in contact with him, either by email or give him a call. We'll include his contact details on the copy of the slides and the recording that I'll be sending along to everybody towards the end of today. So thank you very much, Stephen, for that presentation. It was absolutely very educational. I think everybody's learned a lot. And thank you everybody for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone.